Hi, I'm Holly. I write and teach the Bible studies here at Study with Friends. My background in this is a combination of formal education and my own personal study of the Word. I infuse perspectives from different systematic theologies when I think that would be helpful in rounding out our understanding of the text. But for the record, my formal education is from a Reformed theological seminary. I strongly believe that we should all understand the background of anyone who's teaching us about the Bible. So if you'd like, you can learn more about me at studywithfriends.org or zondervan.com. This is a group of real women doing Bible study and life together, and we're really glad you're here.
What about relationships with one another? Is that part of it? Is that a theme? I feel like that's a theme that comes up a lot.
It is, but it's not really part of the covenants. God doesn't really promise how we'll relate to each other, only because the covenant promises. So you're giving me a little bit of a good springboard to also talk about the conditional and unconditional nature of each of these covenants. So there's a conditional nature, and it's weird. How can a promise be conditional and unconditional at the same time? So this will relate to that if you're patient, if you can give me a minute. There's a conditional nature, which is how we treat each other and how we treat God's land and how we treat our relationship with him will impact. And he's laid all those things out. Like a lot of the laws in the Bible are about how we treat each other. Tons of stuff about murder and stealing and all those laws that feel kind of distant and that we've learned as New Testament believers to like eschew because the Pharisees were too focused on those laws. Well, those laws were there for a reason, to teach Israel how to live in a set apart way. Mm-hmm. And the purpose for Israel was that Israel would be God's elect to show himself to the nations around, not because he wanted to give them special treatment, or which he did, or something because they earned it, but he just chose those people to give the rest of the world a view of who he is and what he does. So sometimes that was military victories. Sometimes it was miraculous occurrences like the parting of the Red Sea. But he chose this group to show the rest of the world who he is. Totally true for us as Christians as well, right? So we can do the things that the Old Testament prescribes in the laws, or the New Testament prescribes in how we're supposed to treat each other, social justice and care for the widow and the orphan and all that. Or we can not do those things, and that's sin. So, but we're humans. And so God knows we can't keep this covenant. So the unconditional part is the part that God keeps. And he knows we're going to screw it up. Israel, he knew Israel. This is not a surprise. None of this took God off guard. He wasn't like, uh-oh, plot twist. He knew it was going to happen. So he laid up these covenants in a way that helped them understand it will be for your good and my glory if you keep it. But rest assured, my name will be known whether you keep it or not. And if you have to be the one I make an example of in a negative way, that's your choice. I'd rather you be the one I make an example of in the positive way. And we see the journey of Israel, out of Egypt, through the Red Sea. Twice the seas were parted, once with Moses, once with Joshua, coming into this promised land, all these military victories. And, Rahab, when they came upon her, she said, I've heard of you and your God. So this is the purpose of Israel, that the nations were made aware of not just of who Israel is, but who God is. Mm-hmm. And in fact, God was really careful to make sure that it never did appear that it was done by any of the leaders, that it was clear that it was him. In fact, that's why he was so upset with Moses, because Moses struck that rock and made it seem like it was Moses who made it happen. And so you see that all throughout as well. The Judges, which one of the authors that I really like says that a better description of the Judges would be warlords or military leaders. They were not really like robed deciding your fate kind of people. They were about, they did do those things. They judged hopefully they judged rightly the things that were brought to them, but more than that, they were sort of instruments of God's deliverance through military victory, breaking out of oppression. So how we treat each other is a conditional element that the covenant can't rest on, that because we'll always fail. It can only rest on the things that God is sure to deliver, how he protected the descendancy through shenanigans that happened all through, like tons of stuff. Like, think about it. When everybody else was just having normal reproduction, the Israelites became so numerous in Egypt that Pharaoh had to turn them into slaves and oppress them. So he was blessing the descendancy. He was making them fruitful and multiply. And so when you think about all the iterations and all the stories, and we talk about Joseph and his coat and, Eve and the apple, and we think about these object lessons, but underneath all of those things is land, descendants, and a special relationship with God. And what are the people doing with those three elements at that time? And that helps you have an anchor or a roadmap or whatever you want to call it, a place that you can land wherever you open the Old Testament. So you open up Habakkuk, all you have to know is what was happening with Israel with respect to the land, the special relationship with God, and the descendants at this moment. Where was Israel right then in that covenant theme? And it helps you understand everything that Habakkuk said. And when we do that, it can also help us understand how to relate it to ourselves. So that's the goal, right? Okay. So one of the things I want to make sure we do in laying this foundation is talk a little bit about the personal application, because I think when we take the personal application first, it helps us to unpack this sometimes dense part of the Old Testament. So way back in the first part of the series, which you probably don't have printed out, I'm just going to feed it to you.
Okay.
We talked about land, descendants, and a special relationship with God. And one of the things that I did in the homework was trying to help us think a little bit differently about each of those things. We've done a little bit of that already, but I want you guys to tell me first, when you think of biblical promised land, tell me what you think of.
Manna.
Great. Manna. What else?
Wait,
Don't overthink it.
I was gonna say the page numbers, but
Yeah, it's not. I don't even have a page number.
because I have the
Did you bring the whole thing?
not the whole thing, just the ones you told us to.
All right, so it's just under land, under the three keys in the first.
It's literally on the first page.
Okay.
But yeah, I had like
Where is that?
I was like, where is it? I have like 40 days and 40 nights in the wilderness.
Oh, that's good. Although that's Jesus.
That is. I thought
40
they were-
years.
40 years.
years. That's
Mhm.
I had the 40 right.
Yeah, you did have 40
wandering
right.
around
By the
in a
way,
hilariously tiny desert.
but let's not miss that. That's good that you.
40, yeah.
Mhm.
There's
40
a lot
and
of
40.
40s, lots of
Mhm.
3s, lots of 7s.
You know what? I'm also going to blow your mind with.
Uh-oh.
Oh.
That blew my mind too. That what Israel understood at that time, what all the Jews understood at that time, was when they call Jesus, when they say Jesus is the Son of God, or when Jesus says, God, my Father, I am the Son. Actually, what I learned is that son language is Israel language. All through the Old Testament, God says, Israel, my son. Israel, my son. And it's a very strange thing to say. I assume it's just because it's a language that we don't speak. But it's so interesting because then you pull it through, and it's when you see Jesus, my son, the parallels are very intense. So you just hit one of them, which is 40 and 40 in the wilderness before entering a promised land, which is Jesus's time
You
of.
are blowing
Yeah.
my mind right now.
I know.
I
I know. You
will-
got to go to seminary. At some time in your life, you just have to do it. It's like
I-
daily
Yeah.
I want to
blows your mind. And you just feel, I mean, for me,
Mhm.
honestly, I just like, there's so much intimacy there where you're
Mm.
just like, God, you are deeper and wider than I will ever understand. And the
Mhm.
more I understand you, the more I am in awe of you. But I love just sharing little nuggets like that because he is so deep and wide, you'll never get to the bottom. And I love that. It's like, as I'm a nerd, I'm a reader. Like, I hate when a book is over. I'm like,
Yeah.
Yeah.
you'll never get to the end of this, you know? So anyway, okay.
I want to ask my roommate about that. She speaks Hebrew.
Oh.
So this language for the son in Jesus is the same as
Yeah. So
Israel?
what you want to think about is this: son language is Israel language until Jesus came.
Okay.
When we think of God's son, we think of Jesus. But before Jesus came, when people would say God's son, they thought of Israel
okay.
because God
Okay.
referred to Israel in that way.
Ah.
And you don't have to speak Hebrew to see that. It's all throughout the Old Testament.
Okay.
It says, Israel, my son, Israel, my son. In fact, even when he's asking Pharaoh to let his people. He says, "Let my son worship me in the desert. Let my
That's
son."
what he says?
Hmm.
Because we translate it as people.
Yeah,
Okay, cool.
yeah. Isn't that interesting?
Very.
Yeah. Okay. So, what else do you think of when you think of biblical promised land? I think of milk and honey.
Yeah.
I
I
have
think
milk and honey,
all of
yeah.
mine are very Veggie Tales based.
Yeah, I was gonna say like fruit. Like
What'd you
I'm
say?
thinking fruit.
Yeah.
Just like
Oh,
Yeah,
yeah.
I'm thinking of Milk and Honey. I'm thinking about that one with the mustache who is also a pirate who
Doesn't do
doesn't
anything.
do anything.
The
Mm,
short
Paw?
one or
Was
the
his
tall
name
one?
Paw? What was his
Paul
name?
Grape.
Paul Grape. He
Oh,
was
yeah,
in
okay,
that.
so
He
the
was
short
in that
one.
episode. So I think of him mainly. I think he
Oh, he
played
was.
Moses. I think
I
he was
think-
Moses. So
mm,
Oh, VeggieTales.
I'm not gonna lie to you. For the longest time, my tiny brain, understood the image of God as the
Paul Grape.
no, not Paul Grape. Paul Grape was Moses. But the I don't remember the context of it, but the silly song was "God is bigger than the boogeyman,"
Oh yeah.
and that piece of
Oh,
celery with the
yes.
Franken
Oh,
things.
yeah.
I was like, well,
Yes,
that must be what
that
God
is-
looks like.
Oh my
So for the
gosh.
longest time, that
Franken
was
celery.
God.
Yeah. Well, I think
Or at
that,
least he was.
I
bigger.
think that as children, we try to think of concrete examples because God is really hard to conceive. But
There's a lot of
he's
vegetables.
kind of hard to
in my theology.
conceive.
mhm.
He's hard to conceive even as adults, which is why having roadmaps like this are really helpful. Okay, so any other things? Yeah, I heard what you said, which was basically fruitful,
Mhm.
and really what that kind of represents is like all good things,
Mhm.
right? Like this is rest, peace.
Mhm. Yeah,
In
not
fact,
fruitful just in like
peas.
the physical fruit sense, but fruitful in like a rest and peace and just like
Abundance.
providing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, and God says in a lot of, in fact, even in the Davidic covenant, He says, "And you will have rest from your enemies." Yeah, so that a lot of promised land. Good, those are good, by the way. So, can I ask you to just extrapolate any way you can how those physical examples might translate to spiritual examples?
Are there like real reasons that certain vegetables were used for certain? Are you about to blow my tiny mind
No,
again?
I don't
I don't
have
think that's-
VeggieTales
She's gonna
theology
do-
in
I'm
my
like,
mind.
does Larry the cucumber mean something?
No. What I'm thinking about is rest from my enemies.
Oh, okay. Not like the
Right? So
okay.
spiritually, like if I'm aware that God is for me, who can be against me? If I really embody that, then I really I'm less affected by what other people might think about me or say about me. So a rest from my enemies in when I can abide in Christ, which is my spiritual promised land. Does that make sense?
Mhm. Mhm.
You said wilderness. So when I think about wilderness wanderings, when I'm not abiding in my promised land and that experience of just wandering around in a lack of anchor, kind of lack of direction kind of way, and then arriving for the first time or again into that spiritual intimacy with God, I can find parallels spiritually between the wilderness and the promised land. Does that make sense?
Mhm.
Mhm.
What are the other ones that you guys said, and can you apply that?
I have two quick questions
Mhm.
about like things that I wrote down, and then I have an example that
Okay,
I can think
great.
of. Was Joshua involved? Because I was like,
In the
he
promised land? Yeah.
Okay. Cause he
Yeah,
came to
so
my
basically-
They
mind.
didn't get there for a while.
Yeah,
There were a
do-
lot of
Yeah.
people.
So
involved.
Moses brought them out of Egypt, and
Yeah.
and he led them in the wilderness. God was there. They built the tabernacle, the 10 Commandments, Mount Sinai, and then Moses basically took them to the cusp of the promised land. He had this big speech like, "Don't forget stuff," and don't forget," and then everybody forgot. And then Joshua basically is like the next in line. Joshua and Moses were super tight bros, and no chronological interruption. Like they were very close, and Moses was like, "You're next," and then God said you're next, and then Joshua takes them into the promised land. They destroy the different places that Joshua is. Yeah, one of them is Jericho, and sometimes he wins through these very strange victories, like marching around and yeah. So Joshua brings them into the promised land, and then he leads them during what we call the distribution and the retaining of the promised land. So Joshua leads them in. allocates the promised land because the tribes each are supposed to have sort of
Mhm.
a little chunk of land,
Mhm.
and then he leads them through the time of retaining it because people are trying to take it back. So he's a big part of it. Very good. What
Okay.
else?
Is it another promised land question?
Yeah.
Okay. I just didn't want to move off.
I just I have a question mark after this one, but I might be confusing it with Jericho. Was there a wall around it, or was it just like
yeah.
okay?
Well, most
There
cities did
was.
have walls. It was part of the way you would build a city to make sure that you kept it safe.
Mm.
But they weren't the walls the way you think of walls right now. They were really thick, and people could actually live in them. Remember, Rahab lived
lived
in
in
the
the
wall.
wall,
Yeah.
Yeah.
So people could actually live in sort of like apartments.
Yeah. That's
So
what I
it was
thinking.
almost like the thickness of a dwelling that you could
Mm.
live in the wall. And then obviously people kept watch on the wall. And so, yeah, when the walls came down, that probably took
Was Jericho?
a human toll. Jericho's the one they marched around.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Is that the promised land?
It was inside the promised land.
That
was a
so,
part
of it.
so it's
So
a
there's like
city.
a-
Mhm,
okay, I
mhm.
understand, I
So
understand.
it's like a region.
Oh,
So
the
we live in a
entire-
And they set
region,
up there you
and
can't
there
do
are
that.
cities in our region, right?
Understandable.
And so they needed to push out the people who God said are not rightfully inhabiting this land. This land is for you. And a lot of people, I'm not going to spend a ton of time on it, but a lot of people get very upset about
Feels very colonizing to me.
well, no, it's not, because when you think about it differently and remember that all of it belongs to God in the first place.
Yeah, okay.
And so he gets to decide. So if we happen to be sitting in my house. If probably me, but not me, but my husband could do it. Because I'm not as tough as he is. But if we went on vacation and someone, I think it's called squatting, someone came and lived in our house, but they didn't have any right to live here, we would eject them.
Wouldn't
because
it be crazy if someone lived in our house while we weren't here?
Yeah, but people do it. I mean, we don't live in a
absolutely
city, but it
Mhm.
happens. If you don't
Mhm.
live in a dwelling for a while, someone may move in
I'm making fun of her. For
who
house sitting.
who doesn't belong there, and it would be your right to eject them because that property belongs to you. And so
Okay.
I hope
Same
that helps you
concept.
think about it, in a
Yeah,
different way.
Different- yeah.
Also because
God.
Yeah.
It just feels very
Yeah.
conquistador. Like,
yeah, but
I know it's not, but it feels that
yeah,
way.
and I think that it probably feels that way because a lot of people have wrongly used the name of God
Yeah.
to do things like that over the years. But that's a different problem. This is God saying, "This is
land.
where I
Yeah.
intended for you all to live," and the people who are in it don't have a right to it. And we're gonna move in, and we're gonna do that. By the way, don't forget, he never came in to that land and said, just beat him up, kill him, and get him. He always said, you should leave. You should leave. And that's why Rahab said, I've heard of you. When you take this city, remember me.
Mhm.
So the people knew that this was the God of the universe. He had made himself known, parting the water.
He
Like
was
there
in
was
a
plenty
fire tornado. He was
plenty that happened. But think
somewhat
about how
noticeable.
he defeated the most powerful power at that time of Egypt.
Mhm.
So his name was known. And if
Okay.
he said, this is where we're going, and you didn't get out of Dodge, it's really kind of on you.
Okay.
I mean, I know that feels like victim shaming to you.
It does.
I
It
know.
does.
I know you. Okay, so we're not going to spend a lot of time on that. But anyway, I want to. I also want to talk to you about.
I have a question about the promised land, though.
Oh, did you have more?
No, I just had a spiritual comparison.
Oh, I
Those
want
are
to
my
hear it.
two.
Let me hear
Oh,
that,
right,
and then
that's how
don't
this
forget.
started.
Don't forget yours.
Okay. I had written down like blessings come from hardships, and then I made little arrows. So I had like the 40 years in the wilderness, even though like hardships are sometimes like things that you bring upon yourself, and then other times it's like things that God allows to happen to you. So like that was obviously they did it to themselves. But then also the promised land is like the blessing, even though it was like there's some blessings that you don't know about, and then there's also blessings that you do know about. So, the promised land was a blessing, and then the hardship was them wandering around for 40 years.
Yeah, and that feels spiritually like easy to compare in your life.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Thank you for saying that's good. Okay, what were you gonna say?
I have a question about the wandering. Just
Sure, if I can answer it, I will.
so Moses brings them right up to the promised land, and then they turn around, or they just don't go in there.
They go in. Just Moses isn't allowed to go in.
Okay, but they're wandering,
They were wandering because they messed up.
and then they forgot
If
where
they
it was.
had made a beeline, do you know it was not?
I said it was a
Yeah.
hilarious. It's a
Yeah.
hilariously tiny
if you
desert.
look
So
at
they're
it,
just going
yeah,
in a
they're
tiny
just
little
wandering
circle.
around.
Circles,
Yeah.
yeah.
How didn't someone?
God.
Wasn't
Well,
someone
guys,
like
look
we've
over
seen
there.
this
God's
cactus
doing-
before?
No.
I'm pretty sure that's the same tumbleweed from 20 years ago. Maybe we should go that way instead. Like none of that was
Quiet,
going on.
son.
New.
I don't know. I think it's probable that they didn't. And the reason that I think that is because really the only thing I can compare it to is when Jesus was resurrected and he was walking along the road with two of his not the 12 disciples, but two disciples,
Who knew
so
what he
people
looked
who
like.
knew who he was, like intimately, and he was walking with them for a long way, because when you look at it and it says beginning with Moses and the prophets, he explained everything to them. That is not a short conversation, and they didn't know who he was. Also, and so I know that God can veil things from us. Also, there were plenty of times that God veiled things across the apostles that they just did not see because it wasn't time yet. And so I think a lot of people think, why were the apostles so obtuse? Like, how did they not see who they were walking with and what was happening? It's pretty clear in scripture that God had veiled their understanding. And in fact, in some cases, it actually says that God had veiled their understanding. And then when the resurrection happened, that's why they were completely changed, because of course the resurrection changes everything. But also I think the veil was lifted. In fact, that's one of the reasons they say the veil was torn, because this separation between God and his people was torn. And that's a huge metaphor. Is it a metaphor or an
I think so,
analogy?
yeah.
Okay.
Metaphor.
I mean, it actually happened.
Right. So I call it like an object lesson, like an actual concrete object lesson of
It's a symbol.
this. Yeah, it's symbolic. Yeah, really good. And actually, one of the things that we could learn a lot about in the latter prophets is they did what's called symbolic actions. So when you read the latter prophets, when you dive in, which I hope you will, you'll see like Jeremiah did a lot of symbolic actions. Hosea marrying the disreputable woman, that was a symbolic action. And so God's big on that stuff. Like, let me show you exactly what I mean. And so tearing the veil was not just about, it was about removing the separation, but was also removing sort of the, he really in Christ, Christ was the revelation. So if we look at the Old Testament and how God dripped out the understanding, the way you guys just had that experience, which I did too, of, from creation, oh my gosh, land, descendants, and a special relationship. This was God's intention, but he dripped that understanding out. If you look at the covenants themselves, the Davidic is the most robust. He gives you a lot of detail. And so he's giving a little bit more revelation as time goes by. And so that veil, I think for me, and I think biblically we can make this argument that a lot of things were veiled to the people of God throughout time until Christ. And then he began to reveal, Christ is the revelation. So through Christ, we have all the revelation. We can see now in hindsight our current condition and what he's given us for the future. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Yeah. So I think it's probable that they did not know.